Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this week for Demystifying Money. I'm your host, Misty Lynch, and I am joined by Kristen Tagliamonte. She is a certified career management and leadership coach and the founder of Empowered Results with CAT. So today we're going to talk about career planning, and we're going to talk all about, some of the things that are very important, not just money, but also how money can factor in when you're making career decisions, and some tips for people who might be maybe looking for a new career or thinking about what they're doing and not feeling maybe fulfilled, or maybe it's time for a career change. So some of her tips that she would share with her clients. So thank you, Kristen, so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Misty. I'm happy to be here.
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
So like most of the entrepreneurs that I talk about, you probably didn't imagine that this would be exactly what you were doing when you first started out. So tell me a little bit more about your career path and what you thought you'd be doing maybe when you were in college or younger, and kind of how that shaped what you do today.
Great question. It's a really long story, so I'll give the short version. When I was in high school, I decided I wanted to be a secretary. That's what they used to call administrative assistants, executive assistants back then. And so I was taking in high school, I'm going to date myself, shorthand and typing. I mean, I was also an AP student, and I remember telling my parents this is what I was going to do, and my father was pretty much horrified and was like, "Nope, you're going to college. You can do whatever you want after college, but you're gonna go. You're gonna get a degree." And anyway, so that's what I did. And in retrospect, he was absolutely right, and I'm glad I did. But that's what I thought I was going to do. I landed in human resources just sort of by default after college because I was a business major and I didn't want to do accounting or finance. And I was like, okay, HR works. And ended up being in HR for 30 years in different corporate environments. And I climbed the ladder. I was a global leader at some brand name organizations, very successful, led some great teams, did some fun stuff. After 30 years, like many people mid-career, Misty, just started to feel like, do I want to do this for another 20 years? I mean, am I have the same passion? So just gave me the opportunity to be really reflective about what was next. And I decided on starting a coaching business. It really, though, is the genesis of why I love working with my clients. There are so many people like me mid-career who are just kind of grappling with where they're at and if it's what they want to continue to do or if they want to do something different, and if so, what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely hear that from a lot of people, and a lot of people who maybe have gotten very used to a certain amount of income or a certain schedule or routine where it feels like there is no alternative or what else. And so a lot of people, it seems, are, when they have to make a career, usually they're forced into it. Sometimes people are dealing with layoffs or organization changes, or their job is being phased out or eliminated. So that can be a really difficult time for a lot of people. So I wanted to talk with you about some of the things that I know you're very, when you're helping people who are really trying to figure out what to do next, or what to do to maybe fill a void or something that they're feeling is missing. How do you think, they need to, rather than just thinking about, I need to make X dollars, what do you think that they should be focused on first?
That's a great question. And just to back up just a little bit about what you were saying in terms of the people that you encounter, whether they choose to do something different or, circumstances like a layoff or whatnot cause them to, the word that comes up over and over again with my clients, Misty, is that they feel stuck. Stuck is the word. And it could be stuck because, I've been making so much money and I can't do something else because I won't make as much money. or it could be stuck because, well, this is all I know and I don't think I can do anything else, or whatever it is. So to answer your question, the best starting place with my clients is to really look at their core values.
Okay.
So I think you're familiar with core values.
Mhm.
I don't want to assume that your audience knows what we're talking about. So just really quick, everybody has a set of values, whether they realize it or not. And they are things about you as an individual that really are your guiding lights, your posts, your guideposts for when you're making major decisions in life. You sort of consciously or subconsciously are going back to what is it that is the most valuable to you. And that is important when I'm working with clients, because if they are considering a change, a shift, that alignment to whatever it is that they're going to do, wherever they're going to go, that alignment with their values needs to be present, or it's not likely to work out. So let me give you an example. Since we're talking about money when it comes to career management, this is a huge one. Compensation, or wealth, could be somebody's core value. And I have worked with clients where that is in their top 5.
Mhm.
And no judgment. That's okay. If that is something that is super important to you and really you identify with, well, then that is going to have an impact on, what your options are for going forward, unless you're independently wealthy. But there are others, right? There's things like risk or risk aversion, right? Some people are very risk averse. Other people are very risk tolerant. So if you kind of value the idea of trying something new and, really jumping in with both feet, great. That opens up some opportunities that maybe not. So those are just a couple of examples of, so the starting point truly is around core values. I have a proprietary self-assessment I
Mhm.
give to my employees before we start, to my employees, sorry, to my clients before we start, so that we can kind of have a in-depth conversation about where they come from, what they mean, how they impact our work together.
I think that's very helpful because I've talked to clients about what they care about, all of these things because it feels like there's a right answer and a wrong answer. And I've done a lot of work going through this type of, values work, talking about it and thinking about it in a way to make I feel like all of the things that I value in my life are getting the attention that they deserve. But like people will say, family, charity, but their time and their money is not going to these areas. So I think it's great that you have a tool to help people evaluate this because it can feel like, well, a good person would say this, a bad person would say wealth. Fine. But I think that, as somebody who grew up with financial insecurity, having money or being, investing money, making money is very important to me. And I'm okay with that. And I think other people, might feel like, ooh, doesn't that make me a bad person? So it's interesting to kind of think, and then what are the other things? And maybe it does mean maybe you want security. Maybe you're right about risk. Maybe you like attention. Maybe you like being in the spotlight. All of these things are going to be helpful with a career because even if they might not seem good, they could be a good career path for somebody. So I think it's funny because when I first looked at mine, I'm like, oh, is that bad? But it's okay because, if you like to talk to people and be out there, then, or if you're risk averse, you might not go work for a startup. It might just feel terrible. Things like that are so important.
Bingo, because it impacts not only the actual work that you're going to do, whether it's a continuation of what you have been doing or something different, but it also impacts where you're doing it. So
Mhm.
your example about a startup, for example, right? Somebody who's risk averse, it's like, well, let's talk about the implications of that. So you hit on some really great points that I just want to emphasize because a lot of coaching, and I know that you are a coach as well, a lot of coaching is really getting to the heart of the shoulds, right? Like you said, you feel bad that, when you first saw your core values, that, well, there are a lot of judgments that people make upon themselves about what's important to them. There are beliefs they have, there are assumptions that they make. We talked about, when you asked me about what am I doing, what I thought I would be doing, the whole thing with my dad, who was like, you're absolutely not gonna, go do what you want to do. And at the time, I was like, well, wait a minute, this is me, this is my career. So whatever, it is what it is. And like I said, it all worked out. There's all these things to unpack that come into play when really it's about, okay, what do you like to do? Right? What are your non-negotiables as far as that alignment with your core values? What's your reality? Because even if money isn't the most important thing to you, Misty, most of us need to make a certain amount to be able to pay our bills, to live. So even if it's not your top, what is your reality? Because that's also going to impact your options.
Yeah, it's very important for people to understand how much does it cost to be you, because we could come up with something and say, okay, I only want to like earn this much money because I want to. And it's like, okay, then we might need to look at a move out of Massachusetts or New England. And sometimes, well, that's not, on the table, or that's not what we want. So I think it is very important for people to just basically understand how much without judgment it costs to be them, then kind of back into certain things that they can then go, really, I think that it's funny. A lot of us do go to college or go into a certain career path because it's expected of us. And I see this with certain clients. I see this, a lot of people who end up having very expensive educations and are doing something completely different than what they went out to do. And they feel very bad about that. And they feel
we're supposed to know when we're 18 years old what we want. But yes, we do. There's a lot, again, back to, there's a lot to unpack. And I will tell you a story about, what is the price or the cost or whatever of being you. I forget how you put it. I loved it. I'll give you just a really quick example. I had this client, great client. She's off doing great things. When we first started talking, she was, looking at early retirement, but wanted to keep working in retirement. And so I asked her, okay, well, what's the minimum that you need to be making in your post-retirement work? So she told me something like 75,000. I was like, okay. So then we started talking about options, and she was like, what I really want to do is be the person at the Barnes and Noble information desk. She'd be fabulous at that. But I said to her, I said, okay, well, let's talk about that, because there's a lot of things that fit there. You're not going to make $75,000 a year being that person. And she was kind of like, oh. And, we moved on, and we came up with different things. But again, no judgment that that's what she wanted to be making. But you can't be saying this is important, and then this is what I really want to do. You've got to find.
And that's why I think that part of the money part is important. I've had people say that same thing. I'd love to go work at Trader Joe's. I'd love to go work here. And sometimes they don't need to make $75,000. They're just in their head, I'm a $75,000, I'm a $150,000 a year person here. So part-time, I'd have to be this person. And it's interesting when you find out like that's maybe not the case. Maybe they do need to earn more, but it is interesting that people seem to be very anchored to a salary. And when you're exploring career options with people, how do you help them kind of, create a strategy around, maybe that is a desired outcome, but like, how can they get past what they already know?
Great question. So to answer that, I think that, people need to understand the concept of coaching. And this, coaching isn't about telling people what to do. It's about drawing it out of them through really, open-ended, empowering questions. So a lot of it is around kind of peeling back. Okay, that example, 75,000, where does that $75,000 figure come from? let's have a conversation about that, right? And maybe it truly is. Or in terms of, I want to do something totally different, but I don't know what it is. Okay, well, let's start with, after, values, what do you really love to do?
Mhm.
Like, what really like gets you going when you're working on X? You are so energized, you're so into it, you're so excited, starting with things that you love, because not every job or position out there is going to allow you to do that. So we go through, just depending on what the situation is, these kind of open-ended discussions, and peel apart the answers to get beneath what's driving it. There's no two clients are alike. Certainly there are ones that are similar. Some people come in having an idea of what they want,
Mhm.
and it's just helping them to achieve it, because maybe they have some blocks there. Person who wants to take a step back because they don't want to be a leader anymore, they just like to be in the weeds. But the whole concept of, well, is that going to look bad? Again, back to other people's impressions. I'm going to be making less, right? What are people going to be thinking about that when I'm making less? How do I navigate that without all of these repercussions, which frankly probably are more perceived than real?
Yeah. And I see, I've seen people who are maybe in corporate and maybe they are very successful individual contributors. And then it feels like, well, the next path is management, people leading, taking on more. And then they struggle or they start to fail or they look for other things. And so I think that that kind of might come back to like that question you asked about, like, where do you feel, the most energized? What do you love doing? Because I think that that's something that I've seen happen, and it's unfortunate when people are just kind of pushed into kind of a channel that seems like it would make sense, and then they're not set up well to succeed in certain areas. So I think that's something that people should kind of understand about themselves, and also that, well, is it going to look bad? Maybe if or if you know yourself well enough to kind of advocate for what you really do enjoy doing, maybe it's possible to still succeed and, have a career path, even if it's not necessarily the one that's kind of laid out for you. I do think about corporate and I wonder, people are saying it's getting I'm hearing it's more difficult. Um, Ageism and technology, all of these things that are kind of coming in, and COVID, a remote workspace coming back. How have you seen, the job search going for people lately? And anything that you've noticed from your perspective that maybe can give job seekers an advantage?
Sure. Well, there's a lot. So let me just quickly think of a couple of top things. And I actually just saw yesterday, I get a weekly labor report through an influencer on LinkedIn. Interestingly, retirees are starting to flock back to the workplace because they have to, but because there's some sense of purpose. And so it's interesting because there's so many things mingled in with that, including ageism, right? Some of these folks are really being welcomed back with open arms because of the intellectual knowledge property that they have, to bring to the younger generations and to bring value to the organization. Don't get me wrong, ageism absolutely exists, but it's just an interesting dynamic that's going on right now with
Mhm.
the boomers and some of the Xers who decided to retire and are now kind of undoing that. But to answer your question about the job search right now, it's tricky. You get some conflicting information out there, Misty, right? You read all the reports about, unemployment is still fairly low, and the employment numbers are up. And then you read the sort of fine print and you see, okay, that's mainly being driven by the hospitality industry. It's mainly being driven by government and healthcare. So if you want to work in any of those industries, guess what? you are in really good shape with your job search. In some other spaces, financial services, tech, biotech right now, it's very, very challenging. It's been a rocky about 2 years in those industries. And some of them are starting to come back a little bit. I have a lot of biotech clients, and some of that's starting to come back, but you've still got a lot of people that have been impacted by layoffs and whatnot the last 2 years who are competing for the same roles you are. So it is a top job market. That's where strategy becomes really, really important, Misty, because you can't. I had a client who was like, I applied to 130 jobs over the last 4 weeks, and I got 2 interviews. Okay, that's frustrating. I get it. What else are you doing? Well, that's it. Not gonna work in this market. You've got to be mixing that with your networking. You've got to be mixing that with targeting some organizations, right? The whole strategy dynamic really changes in an employment market, a labor market like this.
I think that's such a good point, because I've seen that with people who say, well, I've applied to so many, and I mean, it's kind of like dating. Like, they're like, I have like hundreds of people I matched with, or like sending all these applications out there. I don't even know what it is. I basically change it up a little bit, and they're shocked when they're not getting calls or results. And so I do think the volume is important. Like, you can't just wait for the job to knock on your door and come get you. But I do think that the network piece can be very important. So how would you say to somebody who maybe was in a maybe hasn't really updated their LinkedIn or used their network in some time, what are some things that you recommend that people start to do to try to maybe fire that up, like places they could go to initially to kind of start to make progress there?
So another great question. So first, I'll just back up to say, it's all starts with sort of uncovering, okay, so what does your network look like? And through some of that, then you start getting into some of the, I'm an introvert. I don't like to network. I don't like to ask people for help. There's a whole bunch of, there are many, many, many reasons why people aren't engaging their networks. So uncovering what those reasons are is really important in those conversations, Misty. Then it's around coaching about, okay, how are we going to get you over that hump? Because guess what? 75-80% of the jobs people get, they get through networking. So that's first hump. Then it's like, okay, let's put together a strategy. People have this idea. You just said, like, where could they network? People have this concept, I think, of networking, like these big conference rooms, right?
Like a mix and mingle type of thing. And some people hate that. And I get that. And I go to those, and I understand that. But yes.
Absolutely. And hey, those can be great places to network. I'm not saying they're not, but for somebody who's a little bit reticent about it, then you're like, okay, let's start small, right? Let's make a list of all the people in your network. Of course, you start with your professional network, past coworkers, past managers, past clients, past whatever, but you expand it to, okay, so who else is in your network that you know? I mean, I've got stories that I won't bore you with people who, like, the most random person that they have a conversation with about their job search is the one who introduces them to a hiring manager, and boom, bang, bang, boom, there you go. So that's the coaching work, sort of peeling apart what's behind this. You only want to apply for things online. Let's get to that, and then let's unpeel it. And I will just say a little self-promotion here. I have a free resource that's on my website. People can just download it, which is called Networking with Confidence. And it's about getting over that fear and some real tactical ideas about how you can really create and execute on a networking strategy that works for you, because it's so important.
Yeah, no. And I think a lot of people who think about the big conference rooms, it's really just their brains holding them back and trying to get them to be like, no, I'm not going to do that because that's not me. There's plenty of other ways. You can go as far as starting a podcast when you leave corporate, so you can start to meet people They give you their best information, and you get to ask as many questions as you want. So, different things work for you could get creative. So, no, I think it's
Groups
important. I love my network. My
is
network means so much to me. I think it's part of how I've gotten where I've gotten has been just being willing to meet people, and you're right, sometimes it's very surprising
it
how
is.
connections can be made.
And what's that saying, right? Your network is your net worth.
Mhm.
And it is, whether you own a
True.
business or whether it's for your career. And just, quickly back to the big crowd, because, that's not for everybody. And I get that. Some of it is, what am I saying to people that I'm just meeting for the first time? Big crowds don't have to be, a formal networking event. Right now, as I'm talking with people, I'm like, hey, it's wedding season, right? It's, a couple months ago, it's graduation season. You're at these big, celebration events. You never know who you're going to be
Yeah.
talking with, right? So have the conversation when somebody asks you, so what do you do?
Mhm.
Conversation about, that you're looking, or that you're looking to make a shift. And,
Yeah.
you just never know.
Yeah. No, and I think and there's a lot of times where people are more than happy to have a coffee or a conversation, or even, yeah, in certain environments. I don't know. I think it's
100%.
important for people to make those asks. I wanted to also talk with you about something that you mentioned before, about, feeling like bad about, if they, take a step down. A lot of people, and maybe it has something to do with social media or it has something to do with, exposure, but people think that entrepreneurship maybe is the answer. If they can't find a job, then they should be an entrepreneur. It looks very glamorous, your work-life balance and your time and all of these things that you're seeing, like the highlight reels on social media. And I've talked to some people who go, who don't like it and feel like that they should, stick it out or try certain things. So what are your thoughts when it comes to, when it's time to stop looking for a job, and maybe you see entrepreneurship as a path for somebody or maybe not? How do you help those people that maybe feel like shouldn't they be able to figure that out?
Okay. So I'm chuckling because I actually think back to my own transition from, 30
Mhm.
years in corporate to solopreneurship, but that's a whole other conversation. So again, I'm going to come back to core values, because a lot of that plays into, whether or not somebody is going to go try to, go on their own and start a business, whatever kind of business it is. So there's a lot to do with that. The other thing is what I call reality factors.
Mhm.
So, for example, besides for money, benefits
Mm.
are a reality factor for a lot of people. If you're off on your own, guess what? You are sort of responsible for going out and getting your own health insurance, right? For going out and doing IRAs or other, kinds of, so all of that stuff. So that comes into play. Here's another thing though. I would challenge that question to say, does it have to be an either or?
Mhm.
Because it depends. If you're somebody who's out there looking, let's just say you've been laid off,
Mhm.
you could very well go out and start, hang a shingle for doing some consulting work. I have a lot of clients who
Mhm.
are, their expertise is really valued. People hear they're out of work and they're like, oh, we would love it if you could come in and do XYZ projects, right? Doesn't mean that's going to be your forever gig, but while you are
Mm.
seeking that next role, it could be a carryover. And who knows, it could turn into something that does become,
Mhm.
okay, this is actually what I want to do. Or I am going to go get, I mean, we read about this stuff all the time now too, right? There's the side hustle,
Mhm.
the side gig, which is fine if, if you have a lifestyle that
Mhm.
will enable you to do that. So it really is about, okay, so let's not look at it at all or nothing. Let's look at, if you do want to go out on your own, what is it that you're going to be doing? What are your resources? Do you have capital? Do you need to go out and get capital? There's so many, it's like you said, all the bells and whistles that you see of the people, on TikTok and everyone's like, oh, it's the best, and I can, work with it. And there are so many great things about it. I'm not getting into, okay, so you really have to peel back, like, okay, are you going to be an LLC? Are you going to, whatever the, do you need to hire employees? That's a whole thing in and of itself. So back to questions, and let's really uncover if this does seem like something you want to pursue. If at the end of the day it is something you want to pursue full-time or, in temporarily, great. Let's figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah. No, and I think that's great that
And
you both.
networking is important for that
Oh,
too.
for sure. No, and I think that some people say that I'll just be a consultant. And I think that that is depending on what you do and how specific. And I know some people that have gone into very specific biotech consulting, cybersecurity consulting, which is very valuable. And they have a lot of knowledge, and their corporate experience has helped them with the knowledge part, not the business owner part necessarily, or the networking part, but some of it. And that's been successful. But then other people, I think it's it's a little different. That they think like, oh, I'll just maybe do that, or I'll get a real estate license, or I'll go do this. And you're like, those jobs are hard. Like, they're very hard. But I like the thought of maybe you do something temporarily, and it doesn't have to become your identity or your whole, you know, career path. It can just be something that you do, and then you may float back. So I think it's super important for people to keep an open mind there. I wanted to talk with you though about kind of when people feel like they don't have a lot of choices, or that they, the choices they made led them here, and this is just the way that life has turned out for them. So I wanted to talk with you. What are your thoughts about, the choices that people have and that they make?
So it's a really important question. I don't have any choices, or I don't have choices.
Mhm.
So first thing is, okay, let's just put that over here, because that's not true. Everybody has choices. You might not like the
Mm.
choices that you have. That's a different thing, but you have choices. Okay. So first there's that. Okay. So let's figure out what are those choices. And sometimes that takes some work, right? Some brainstorming, whatnot. And then it's like, okay, so what do you think about those choices? And why do you think that about those choices? And what could happen? Because again, sometimes we make choices and they don't work out.
Mhm.
It's just life. Okay, so here's choice A. What's the best thing that could happen if you chose choice A? What's the worst thing that could happen? And if the worst thing does happen, then what? So it's a very it is actually, I think about, my LinkedIn headline actually has concept of choice in it, because it's so critical. When we're all managing our career, and make no mistake, we are all responsible for managing our own careers. We can't say, oh, somebody else is going to do that for me, right? So our decisions, our choices, all of that, as hard as they might be, but when we're doing that, we're all along the way, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, we are making choices all along the way
Mhm.
about what we're going to do, where we're going to do it, what we're going to tolerate, whether or not I'm going to ask for that raise or promotion, or the choice about negotiating a job offer is another one. I'll have people say to me, mainly females, say, and I can't negotiate. I never negotiate a job offer because it makes me sound pushy. It does? No. Employers expect you to negotiate, number one, and number two, as long as you know what the market is. So choices, we're always, always, always making choices in our career. Feeling comfortable with the choice that you're making is really usually where the challenge is.
Yeah. No, it's very true. And I hear that. And I remember speaking with somebody who was telling me about, choices, and we were talking, and a lot of times people will tell me, well, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen if you leave this job? And it's, well, I could go back and get the same job, I could be doing, and basically they're living their worst case scenario every single day and thinking that they have no no other choice. And so I think that it's important for people to kind of reflect a little bit on the choices that they have in front of them, that they have made. And you're right, some people have better choices and then others, and that's okay. I had different choices, I had different choices where I would go to college than other people, and different things, and it works out, but I feel like comfortable with the decisions that I made with what was available at the time. And so that's something I think people feel like, well, it's up to everybody else and they have no control and no say. And so I think it's very important to consider, okay, what's the worst could happen if you negotiate? And some people will say, oh, they'll rescind the offer and then they'll give it to somebody else. And you're right. I think that just kind of keeps people small. Kind of makes it easy to say, yeah, I shouldn't do that. When I've hired people in corporate, I have never not expected somebody to counter ever. Like,
Yeah.
I've never led
In
with the best
fact,
offer in corporate either. I feel like in certain businesses, they might say, this is what I could pay you, and this is the deal. And like, it's a small business and it's different, but like, very rarely is there no wiggle room anywhere.
yeah, no, and that's again, there's all kinds of ways to talk about, compensation expectations before you even get to that point, which again, don't be afraid to have those conversations. It's a normal part of the employment process. And if you're not having those conversations, it can in fact raise some red flags for
Yeah.
employers too, right? So it's expect people to just know that. I mean, I've got my 30 years of HR behind me. I'm a career coach. I know, what the market will bear for certain. But it's important when people do come to me that they do understand that talking about money, whether it's around a promotion or just an increase or, a job offer or whatever it is, talking about money is expected.
Yeah. Yes. It should feel, I mean, it's going to be uncomfortable, obviously, in this situation for people who are nervous and anxious about a job. But that's why I think it's important. I usually have people, when we have like our hell no number, our okay number, and our hell yes number. And so wherever it falls, because you have to know, like, this is not enough for me to make it or live. And so that's okay. And that's fine. But it's like, there's others, and it's good to kind of know them in the back of your mind, like, so that you don't just keep searching for something better every time you take something. So, very
Absolutely.
interesting stuff. I think that, a career it used to be people's identity. And you've said that about some of the boomers coming back, and some people I've seen that, are very reluctant to retire. Financial services is one of those areas where people just kind of tend to stay forever. Politics, don't get me started, but like, there is a lot of that out there. And so I think it's important for people to look at their values and think about it, not just, what will be the best career for me, but also what lets me live a life that incorporates the rest of those values, and spending time, on the things that I care about that maybe are outside of the career. But it's such an important space. So I'd love for you to share how people can learn more about you and maybe get in touch with you if they're at a point where they need some help managing their career or really want to do the work and figure out what's the best thing for them to do with the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years.
Yeah. Um, 10, 20, 30, 50 years, or short term, long term, it's all
Yeah.
important when you're thinking about, again, my whole thing is proactively managing your career, not waiting until something happens. Sometimes it does, but so how can people get in touch with me? Well, a bunch of different ways, Misty. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Kristen Tagliamonte on LinkedIn. My website is empoweredresultswithkat.com, and all over my website there are ways for people to set up a complimentary call with me, 45 minutes. Sometimes they go over that about what it is, why did they reach out to me, what are they thinking, what's in their way, what are their challenges, really ask me questions about coaching or about my philosophy. So there's buttons all over my website, as well as a link on my LinkedIn page for them to do that.
Well, thank you, Kristen. And I do think that people should consider their ability to earn income as one of their most valuable resources. And I do believe this. I think that, your brain is one of the most value. I mean, it's one of those things that like your health and your brain, it's more valuable than the money. You can't get it back. But I do think that sometimes we get in our own way. And a lot of times, if we are able to bring in more income or perhaps work in a career that we feel good about, this can either lengthen how long we can, not counting the days until you can retire, or being able to feel good about this piece. This is so important. So I do think that this is a very solid investment for people to make at different points of their career, or if they're in leadership and they do need some coaching to improve what they're doing. So I do think that this is one of those investments that I would take very seriously and I would recommend to people who are feeling stuck. So if you are out there listening, please go to Kristen's website, check it out. I think it's such an important thing for people to consider. Also, if you would like to look at your own financial plan, see how much it costs to be you and figure it out, I'd love for you to head over to mistylynch.com. I'd be happy to help you kind of answer those questions. You could also find other episodes of the podcast or resources like the book or TV show if you're looking to improve your own money mindset and confidence when it comes to money. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk again next week. Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.